皆様おはようございます。ジャパンモビリティショー2023ジャパンフューチャーセッションへようこそ。こちらのステージではさまざまな分野で活躍されている方々にご登壇いただき、モビリティから広がる未来や可能性をさまざまなテーマ、視点で考え、皆さんと一緒に乗りたい未来を探していきたいと思います。本日はこの後10時30分よりグローバルモビリティの未来をテーマにモビリティオブザマインド、未来を切り開くモビリティの力についてセッションを行ってまいります。開始は10時30分を予定しております。なお、お座席は自由席となっております。一人でも多くの皆様におかけいただけますようご協力をお願いいたします。お荷物を置いて席を確保することはご遠慮ください。携帯電話はマナーモードに設定をしていただきまして、通話はお控えください。また座席およびエリア内でのお食事はご遠慮ください。ドリンク類はお飲みいただけます。なおゴミは必ずお持ちになり、お近くのゴミ箱へお願いいたします。同時通訳レシーバーのご案内をいたします。日本語の同時通訳をお聞きいただけます。座席エリア入り口の同時通訳レシーバー受付カウンターにてお受け取りください。では間もなくスタートしてまいりますので、どうぞお席におかけいただきましてお待ちください。
For your information, we have voice receivers available to listen to the simultaneous translation in the next session. Please ask for them if you wish to use them at the reception counter. We will begin in a couple of minutes. Thank you for your patience.
皆様おはようございます。ジャパンモビリティショー2023ジャパンフューチャーセッションへようこそ。
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Japan Mobility Show 2023 and to the Japan Future Session.
こちらのステージではさまざまな分野で活躍されている方々にご登壇いただき、モビリティから広がる未来や可能性をさまざまなテーマ、視点で考え、皆さんと一緒に乗りたい未来を探していきたいと思います。
On this stage, we will be inviting prominent speakers from various fields to think about the future and possibilities of mobility from various topics and perspectives. We'd like to explore the future that we want to ride together.
ここからのお時間はグローバルモビリティの未来をテーマに、モビリティオブザマインド、未来を切り開くモビリティの力についてセッションをしていきます。
This session will combine the perspectives to think about the global perspective and also the future of mobility. The title is Mobility of the Mind, the Power of Mobility in Developing the Future.
それでは始めてまいりましょう。ご登場いただきますのはトヨタ自動車株式会社チーフサイエンティストギル・プラット博士。
Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Gill Pratt, Chief Scientist and Executive Fellow for Research at Toyota Motor Corporation.
オートモーティブニュースアジアエディターハンス・グライメルさん。
And Mr. Hans Greimel, Asia Editor of Automotive News.
そして本日オンラインでのご出演となりますオートモーティブニュースエグゼクティブエディタージェイミー・バッターズさん。
And we're delighted to welcome online Mr. Jamie Butters, Executive Editor of Automotive News.
それではここからはギル・プラット博士、よろしくお願いいたします。
Now, the floor is yours, Dr. Pratt.
Thank you so much, and good morning to all of you. I am going to speak to you today about mobility of the mind, about how connection, empathy, and love can become the greatest competitive advantage of Japan's car industry. Now, let me begin with this story. In 1623, the English poet John Donne wrote a series of meditations that began with the following lines. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. So today, exactly 400 years later, after that poem was written, we find ourselves grappling with the same fundamental need to build human connection. And it's oddly at a time where many could argue that the world is better connected than ever. So why is human communications and connection so difficult? Well, inside each one of our brains, every one of our roughly 100 billion neurons is connected to an average of 10,000 other neurons. And because so much connectivity is in our brains, the net communications inside of our brains occurs at an extraordinary high rate, a rate of terabits of information flow per second. Now, between our brains, between each of us as people, communications occurs a trillion times slower, at around 10 bits per second. And this is true whether we write, whether we read, whether we speak, or whether we listen. So each of us until now has been an island with slow interpersonal communication that creates psychological distance between us. So behavior science clarifies further that our interpersonal psychological distances are ones of space, ones of time, and ones of circumstance. We first used our legs and animals' legs to conquer physical distance. And then we invented the boat and the car and the airplane and the spaceship to move even faster and even further. We used our imaginations and we told stories to bridge time and circumstance. Imagination and stories worked because our brains include another special kind of cell called mirror neurons, and this helps us to imagine that we are someone else. It's what we use to have empathy. And this is why we love watching plays, why we love watching movies, and why we love listening to stories. Today, the telephone, the television, and social media have amplified how we tell stories. But are billions of people connected with today's electronic and social media able to truly bridge this psychological distance between people? Well, unfortunately, the answer is no. We don't really understand each other, and we are still mostly separate islands. Sometimes the islands have many people inside of them, but there are still separate islands. We need something better than the telephone and television, and better than social media with its encouragement of toxic tribalism. But what is that? Well, I believe that automakers, and specifically Japanese automakers, are uniquely positioned to help solve the problem of psychological distance across space, time, and circumstance, particularly between our customers and ourselves. We, as car companies, created physical mobility on a massive scale. We now have an opportunity to transform ourselves from car companies into mobility companies, and we must move beyond physical mobility and use our deep customer understanding and empathy to bridge the psychological distance of time and circumstance between a diverse number of customers and ourselves. We must move beyond a naive idea that even though everyone must eat, everyone wants the same food. And we must realize that cars are much more than utilitarian ways of moving goods and people. As Akio Toyoda-san said once to me when I first met him, people love cars, but they do not love refrigerators. But why is there a difference? Well, I used to think it was only because, unlike refrigerators, cars amplify people's natural abilities, and they make them feel superhuman. Cars respond to drivers, amplifying the effect of their motion on the steering wheel, on the throttle, and on the brake tremendously. But then I realized that people also love cars because they connect the driver to the manufacturer. The manufacturer's attention to detail and design, the thoughtfulness, expresses the love of the car company for its customer. And that love gets reciprocated by customers who tell their friends, their family, even perfect strangers about their love of their vehicles. And that creates even more customers in the process. And when those new customers drive their car, they are silently connected to all of the other people on the road that are next to them and around the world that drive the same brand. The brand is an expression of the self, of course, but it is also a collective choice that binds us closer together. Everywhere we look, there are communities of owners of a particular car model. And it's not just about emotions. It actually leads to tangible economic results. Fred Reichheld is a famous Bain & Company inventor of something called the Loyalty Measuring Net Promoter Score. And it explains that besides the moral imperative to love customers, companies that focus on loving their customers are more likely to be financially successful. In Reichheld's words, a company that has its fundamental purpose, it's not to make a profit, but rather to love its customers and its employees by enriching their lives. Now, Hiroshi Tsukakoshi, the chairman of the Ina Food Company, he addressed similar themes in his book, Tree Ring Management, and he put the happiness of his customers and his own employees before profit. The result was extraordinary success and good profit, not as the cause, but as the result of this philosophy. Which brings us to what is so special about Japan, in my opinion. When I first read about the mutual love between a brand and its customers, it made me think first of Japan, where children are taught from the earliest age to love empathetically, to consider the well-being of others above themselves. and where the small kindness of pouring drinks for other person is only the tip of a vast underwater iceberg of empathic love that runs throughout Japanese society. That empathetic love is not only something to feel good about, I believe that it is also Japan's greatest competitive strength. People love Japanese cars because they, in my opinion, are like flowers. They are tokens of love that go from company to customer. For example, when I give a flower to my wife, when she tells me that she loves this flower that I gave her, what she is really saying is that the flower carries a message of my love for her. Customers interpret products that we make in the same way as that flower. When a customer says that they love their car, they are not only saying that they appreciate their car's utility, quality, durability, and reliability, they are also saying that the car makes them feel loved, similar to the way that children feel loved by a parent and spouses feel loved by each other. Now, Steve Jobs said this same thing once before. By making something we care, and with care, you are expressing your gratitude to humanity and to the species. Now, what country did Steve particularly admire for its care in making products? Japan. So it's not only moral to love our customers, it's also really smart. Customers can tell when companies love them and when companies do not love them. When companies genuinely love their customers, customers reciprocate by loving the company's products and the company that made them. It's an extraordinarily powerful virtuous cycle, and it's one that we, as companies born in Japan, are naturally strong at. In closing, I want to refer to the great Japanese industrialist Sakichi Toyoda, who invented his first loom out of love for his mother, and among other things said that we should open up the window because it's a big world outside. I want to humbly suggest that in addition to Sakichi-san's vital lesson, I think that companies in Japan should also occasionally look in the mirror. Not to admire ourselves, of course, but to recognize that our greatest strength as Japanese companies to tackle the challenges ahead of us already exists. Now, this is a picture of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it begins with the physiological and safety needs that Japan's products in the past addressed better than others, resulting in the first economic miracle. Now that other nations have caught up in making high-quality products that address those lower-level needs, it's time for us in Japan to address the next need up, love and belonging. Japanese products that demonstrate more love for the customer and evoke more love from the customer can create a second economic miracle, both for Japan's automotive industry and I believe for Japan as a whole. When companies genuinely love their customers, customers reciprocate by loving the company's products and the company that made them. And that can help to make John Donne's aspiration that no man be an island come true. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gill, for that very thought-provoking discussion and presentation today. It's not often that we hear the words empathy and love being talked about in our industry, the auto industry. After all, we're a business, not an empathy maker. So I wanted to see if you could maybe explain that a little bit more to us. You say that the Japan industry, or Japan in general, is naturally has that as a natural advantage, a built-in advantage, that they're good at empathy. They have a strength or a predilection for empathy. How does that translate itself into the automotive world? How do you see that in real life?
Well, thank you very much, Hans. Here's how I see it. And again, I'm a foreigner who loves Japan, but I'm not from Japan. But what I see from the outside is that there's a huge difference between Japan and the West in communications. We know that people in the West, we like to talk a lot. And it's sometimes funny how much we want to talk. People in Japan only speak a little bit. And the reason is that the culture here is one of high context. There's a whole lot going on, and if you remember in my slides, I talked about 10 bits per second between people, the low communication rate. I believe in Japan it's even lower. And so what people in Japan wonderfully do to make up for that low communication rate is that they have what's called theory of mind. It's a scientific idea, which really means empathy. If you only say a few words to me, I have to have an imagination, empathy for what's probably going on in your mind when you say those few words, and that's how I understand you. And this is kind of like the water around a fish. A fish is not cognizant, is not aware of the water around itself. But someone from the outside, like myself, can see, here's the water and the fish. I think that Japan has this incredible advantage compared to the rest of the world, that people naturally grow up here with much more empathy for each other, much more ability to be able to imagine what someone else is thinking, simply because of the tradition of how communication is done here. And I think that we, as Japanese car companies, can use that advantage in order to be even more competitive in the car market, first by understanding our customers, and second by understanding our employees, or what we call team members, who help to make our cars. And I think it's an incredibly strong competitive advantage, and our customers will love us back as a result.
And if I might just ask a quick follow-up then, before I turn it over to my colleague Jamie. As we transition now from the traditional auto industry into a new mobility industry that's connected with outside industries like the IT and software, and we create a new product with a new value, how important, or how much more important, will empathy be in creating a new kind of product?
It's a wonderful question. We're only beginning to imagine what those products are going to be. You know, it's so wonderful that we've switched here from a car show to a mobility show. But what does that really mean? Well, it means that when we're in a vehicle and we're traveling somewhere, we go on a journey. It's an extremely human thing to do. So many stories have been written about people going on journeys. Sometimes we go on the journey together, the driver and the passenger. Up until now, it's only been very primitive forms of entertainment, so we don't get bored. There's the radio, maybe we talk to each other. These days we use the cell phone on the speakerphone. But there's so much more that we could do, and we don't know what it's going to be. I'll give you an example. The Apple iPhone and the Google Android phone, when they were first made, Facebook was not invented. And so nobody knew that people would use their phone to take pictures and to share experiences with each other in the way that they do on Facebook. I don't know what the applications are going to be that are going to be popular in the car, but I'm very confident that if we build the substrate underneath it, if we provide an environment that this experience of going on a journey together, of being essentially stuck in the car for perhaps a number of hours, is a very unique thing. It's different than the rest of the time than we are with our cell phones. And I'm certain that new applications having to do with empathy for the customer will be created inside of the car.
Oh, very, very interesting indeed, yes. Jamie, I'd like to turn it over to you from the United States. Take it away, Jamie.
Thanks, Hans. Yes, Gill, I'm really fascinated by this idea of empathy, especially in the complicated world of the auto industry, where so many companies, really operate globally, and you have to have empathy and understanding for people from different cultures, people with different needs, different means, and really what that means for each company's product portfolio, how they make decisions about things like which vehicles to make and how to power them.
Well, I think that this same empathy applies across the board. We talked about it in terms of software apps and things like that, but it of course applies to different kinds of powertrains because different parts of the world are different. And even in the same part of the world, there are people that are in different circumstances. Some live in the city, some live in the suburbs. what they need is very, very different. Some are wealthy and some are not so wealthy. What they need is very, very different. And of course, we have to provide diverse solutions for diverse customers. That's the way that we respect the humanity of people, by letting each individual person sort of be themselves. And that's really the goal, I think, of all of the Japanese companies, and why we have this policy of having multiple pathways in order to give the customer what they want. And the most important thing that we give them is opportunity. We help them with the mobility needs that they have in the circumstance that they are in. And we help them to do the best that they can to contribute to reduction of carbon emissions to help prevent climate change. It's a very humble kind of position. It's saying we don't know the answer for each individual person. And there's actually, a great tradition in Japan here, again, of saying that our job is to be respectful of what the customer wants. And I think it's a differentiating quality, and it's one that I think that we should be proud of, not in an arrogant way, but I think in a way that we think this is the best way that we can help each individual person in the world.
Very good.
Can you elaborate a little more, especially in light of the challenges for a manufacturer of expensive consumer goods that benefit from scale, right? We can't necessarily create a technological solution for each individual. We have to find ways to intuit and learn what fairly large groups, as you said, even within other markets or the different countries, how does that present special challenges? How do you try to think through those challenges?
Well, let me sort of start by saying, as I said at the beginning, I think that people in Japan have a natural affinity, a natural strength in this area. But there's also new technology that we can use to make it go even further. Many of you have heard about generative AI, about large language models, things like ChatGPT. And there's been a lot of press about, how they're scary and an existential risk, some people say. I don't think that's true. In reality, like any technology, since the discovery and harnessing of fire, there are always dangers and there are always opportunities. And new AI systems are the same. So to answer your question, AI, in modern AI, has the ability to gather a lot of data from a lot of people and help car designers and people deciding on strategy in car companies to understand the diversity of opinions of customers far more broadly than before. We used to put up these kind of cartoon pictures that had to do with a particular type of customer that we were making a car for. It was called a persona. And maybe we would have 2 or 3 personas for any given car design. These days, with AI systems, we're beginning to realize that we can include personas for millions of customers to help a designer to better empathize, to better understand with all of the customers that might potentially buy the car. And it's an incredibly powerful tool. And I think if you take that and you take the empathy that is naturally a strength in Japan and you put it together, we have a tremendous opportunity to be very, very competitive in this field.
Very good. Thank you. When we talk about the transition again from the old world of automotive into the new world of automotive, one of the concerns among the industry players is that there will be a tremendous upheaval. There will be chaos and there will be job losses, especially. We hear that a lot here in Japan, especially from Chairman Akio Toyoda and his role as the head of the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association. He's very concerned about making sure that there's a smooth transition for the 5.5 million people whose livelihoods and jobs are tied to the auto industry here. What is your prediction for that transition? How can we ensure a smooth transition that includes everybody and brings them along with that evolution? And I'm thinking it might tie into the empathy, because one of the things we recognize about Japanese automakers in general is that they try to steer clear of job cuts, layoffs. That is against their general principles. So how do we manage that with this radical transformation?
Well, it's an excellent question, and it's extremely important. We have to empathize not only with our customers, but with our employees as well, the people who work in everything from strategy to design to manufacturing to sales to finance. And the world is changing, and electrified vehicles need different kinds of mechanical parts than non-electrified, and battery electric vehicles different than most electrified vehicles as a special case. And I understand the concern, but first of all, it's important to understand the time scale. There is something called Amara's Law. It's a very famous law in the economic and scientific community. And what it means is that we tend to overestimate the rate of technological change in the short term, but we tend to underestimate the rate of technological change in the long term. And I think in this technology transition, from non-electrified vehicles to electrified vehicles, and in some areas of the world from electrified vehicles to just BEVs, that we are falling prey to Amara's Law, as has happened many, many times before. And certainly in some parts of the world, the transition is incredibly rapid. This was true, by the way, as the transition from horses to cars in New York City was very, very rapid. However, taking the world as a whole, the transition is actually limited by the recharging of renewable power, the grid. It's also limited by battery materials. And these limitations mean that that transition globally will be slower, and it means that companies like ours that have global markets actually will have a reasonable amount of time for different employees to learn different skills. I'm not worried about the total demand, the need for people to work on technology for cars. I think that's going to remain quite high. Okay. And furthermore, because of Amara's Law, I believe that the rate of that technology transition globally will be quite reasonable, even though locally, occasionally, it will be very rapid.
Very good. Jamie, can I turn it back to you for a follow-up or a different direction?
Well, yeah, I wanted to run this by you, Gil. Japan has often been seen as behind on battery electric vehicles. I think a lot of that is because it avoided some of the frenzy, from investors, from regulators, and others, toward BEVs. I think the rise of Tesla maybe gave people the impression that this was the one and only way to go. We heard a lot of companies make proclamations about going all electric, and not so much from the Japanese automakers. And now, the EV transition's kind of hitting a little speed bump, and some companies and some governments are really reevaluating their positions. At this point, do you feel like Japan's approach is being better appreciated in the world?
Well, I do think that it is. And I think it's been a gradual transition, maybe over the last 2 years or so, where we were really an outlier compared to other parts of the world and car companies in other parts of the world. But when we did a scientific analysis of where we thought that the market was likely to be, and we also very humbly thought about the fact that it's hard to predict the future and that the future is very uncertain, we realized that we need to keep our options open, and we need to respect the diversity of customers in the world, and it will take a long time till recharging infrastructure and enough battery materials are available for a full transition, for example, to one technology like BEVs. And so I think what's actually happening is we're moving from the kind of fear that Japan has to catch up to the world on BEVs to a realization that, look around the car show. We are going to be making a lot of BEVs very, very soon, and we even have some now. But what's happening now is that the world is catching up to us in this mindset. And the mindset is that the answer to uncertainty is diversity. And the way to respect diverse customers is to provide them with diverse solutions so that every single one of them can have a vehicle that is incredibly effective at making their lives of higher quality. Second is affordable and fits within their economic world. And the third gives them the best possible way that they can contribute to solving the climate change problem by lowering CO2 emissions for their particular circumstance. And to bring it back to the beginning of my talk, why is this happening in Japan? Some people are cynical and they say, well, it's because we're invested in one technology. I know from my work inside of Toyota, and I know this happens in other Japanese car companies as well, that in fact this is a universal kind of feeling in Japan that's not based on technology, but rather is based on experience and a culture of empathy for the customer, of really putting the customer first. I think that's true.
And Gill, just to a quick follow. Sorry, Jamie, would you like to jump in there, or go ahead?
Well, I did have just one other follow-up because, as we as communicators, that sometimes it's difficult to know how much your message, sinks in with people. Sometimes it feels like it just bounces back. But Gill, I know you have had some success in sharing the thinking and opening some people's minds.
Well, so I can talk a little bit about that, but I want to make clear that the real reason that things are changing is not because of me. It's because the facts speak to this particular approach being the best one. And time has revealed that this is the best approach. The one example that I can give is a year ago at the World Economic Forum in Davos. One of the talks that I gave was on this topic. There was an audience maybe half the size of this audience here. And at the beginning of the talk, it was clear that the audience was hostile. So everyone in the audience was like this, and at the end of the talk, the moderator of the talk did a wonderful thing. She asked for a vote. How many people think that Toyota's approach makes sense? And how many people think that actually we should still have a monoculture of BEVs? And the thing that really made me feel wonderful was that the vote was 50-50, around 50% to 50%. Totally different than this kind of feeling at the beginning of the talk. I think that if we simply speak the truth about the actual time that transitions take, about Amara's law and what that means, and then finally and most importantly about the diversity of people and circumstances around the globe, it is obvious to anyone who looks at this without bias that there will be many BEVs in some parts of the world very soon, and I'm sure Japan will make many wonderful BEVs such as the ones that we've seen here. But there's also going to be a great need for other vehicles, other electrified vehicles in particular, PHEVs, HEVs, FCEVs. I think that all of them can contribute in this multi-path answer, and it's actually the way to get the most net reduction in carbon dioxide emissions, because each one of the people that can avail themselves of one of those multi-path possibilities will be replacing an older ICE that emits much more CO2. And we want to encourage that as much as possible. We need to not let perfect be the enemy of good.
And Gill, just to play devil's advocate here for a second, when you talk about a diverse drivetrain or powertrain approach with hybrids, efficient ICEs, fuel cell vehicles, plug-in hybrids, battery electrics. It's very easy or somewhat easy for a big company like Toyota to do that. We just saw yesterday that they announced record earnings on a quarterly basis across the board, and they're predicting more record earnings for the full year. So we're talking about the biggest car company in the world, one of the richest, most profitable companies out there. For the Toyotas, for the Volkswagens, for the Hyundai Motor Groups of the world, it's one thing to be able to diversify your investments and play in many fields. But what should the small companies or the medium-sized companies do out there that don't have the deep pockets and the big funds that a company like Toyota or Volkswagen might have?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that it's really important to recognize that any success that Toyota has is due to the incredibly hard work of the people inside of the company, and also the incredible feelings from our customers that work together with us in very much the same way that I'm talking about. And I think that same kind of spirit actually is very important for all of the different members of the Japanese Automobile Manufacturers Association, not only the OEMs, but all of the suppliers. I think it's very important that we all see opportunity there. I think for smaller companies, the most important thing, which is true for any kind of diversity, is to do what you're strong at, do what you're good at, do what is natural, what you want to do, because in that way you will end up making the best products that have your special flavor to it. Your love for the customer in that product will generate reciprocal love from the customer about that product. But obviously, small companies can't do everything. And I think the answer to that is something else that Japan is very good at, which is partnership, which is saying that it's okay for one company to do this one special thing that's their particular passion, and to be a partner to other companies. We can't do it alone, and especially, in Toyota, we have many, many meetings saying, okay, we're going to do this part, and we will partner with other companies to do the other parts. And that's true no matter how big you are.
All right. Well, I think we're coming close to the finish here, but Jamie, is there anything else you would like to add or ask about?
I have, one. Let's see if we can fit in one more question. I'm afraid it's not a small one, so if you must, Gill, just break off a piece. But I think, I'm curious about your role as Toyota's chief scientist, which is such a cool title. But to me, I envision you really helping the other executives, untangle difficult problems, systemic challenges. And how do you think through some of the challenges that are ahead of us in the transition to electric vehicles, in the emergence of the BEV market? I'm thinking about minerals and battery chemistries, charging, and those kinds of really big problems that kind of overwhelm people sometimes.
So thank you very much for the question. What I try to do in order to contribute is to bring a wide angle view of this thing, which is what the scientific view really is. Let's look at this as a system, not as just a car. And so I'll give you an example in the world of recharging for BEVs. What is holding us back? Well, it's not just the car. It's the power grid. And why is it the power grid? It's not that there's not enough total power in the US, for example. I know in Japan it's a little more difficult. But the renewable power, if we are to generate more of it in the US, will be generated in places where the sun is shining more and where the wind is blowing more. And that's a place that's different than where people live, where they need to recharge their cars. And so it's by taking that kind of wide angle perspective, the system view, that I can contribute by saying, well, this is going to be a limitation because it means new transmission lines that have to go from renewable power generation to the customer to recharge their car. It's that sort of thinking. that I think is something that scientists everywhere can contribute to help companies to make better business decisions. There's many other examples that come to mind here. The one you mentioned of battery minerals and materials, very much the same way. From a scientific point of view, understanding the difference between solving this for a small scale of cars and trying to do it for a much broader scale of cars. What happens as the transition gets really big? Do we really have the battery minerals that we need? And the answer is no, but are there still other methods that we can do? Another characteristic of science is that we don't get too attached to one answer. We try to look at all available answers, and we focus on the particular problem we're trying to solve. So that's why we believe very strongly in multi-pathway.
Well, I think that is an appropriate and fitting way to end our discussion today. Thank you very much. I will end with just an extension of what you say about the multi-pathway. We see that on full display here at the Japan Mobility show. Of course, it's often said that Japan is a latecomer or slow to the BEV race, the battery electric race, but we see that here that Japan has that puzzle piece in its hand and is about to put that BEV puzzle piece into the puzzle so that it has a full multi-pathway approach. And the other thing that I will notice about the mobility show here this week is that it's not just the automobile industry alone that can take on the challenge of evolving into this new world. It really requires not just a vertical association of the old industry, but a horizontal association with partnerships outside of the traditional auto industry, software, telematics, the infrastructure, and that is what we all here see on display. So I will applaud for JAMA, the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association, for thinking outside the box this year and trying to reinvent the old Tokyo Motor Show as something new and forward-looking, and bringing in a wider array of the industry to help evolve us moving forward. And so congratulations to JAMA on that. Jamie, any further wrap-up comments that we can take from the United States point of view?
Yes, I also wanted to thank Gill and thank JAMA for having this conversation. You know, as there has been this concern that Japan is lagging behind not only Tesla and the Chinese, but also the Koreans and the Germans and even the American companies. I think, you know, clearly, though, we're still in the early days of this emerging segment. You know, companies here in the U.S. are really aggressively reevaluating their positions on EVs right now. GM has dropped some near-term targets. Ford is losing more than $30,000 per EV, and it's slowing some investments. I really applaud them for giving the transparency into the profitability of their different segments. Interestingly, even Tesla is moving more cautiously, kind of slowing its construction process of a new factory in Mexico. China and Tesla have an advantage right now, but it's not an insurmountable one by any stretch. For the baseball fans there, I would say this game is maybe in about the third inning, and it isn't a one-game series. There's a lot of EV baseball left to be played.
Very good. Perfect for the World Series season. Thank you very much, Jamie. And let's give a big round of applause to Chief Scientist from Toyota Motor Corp, Dr. Gill Pratt, for sharing with us his unique insights and observations and forward-looking comments about the industry. Thank you very much, Gill.